map of sorts that gives you a sense of what the evidence will be. Because it is the Commonwealth that bears the burden of proving the charge of murder in the first degree that is brought against the defendant, Judy Church, the Commonwealth goes first at the opening statements phase of the proceedings. So the first witness is Mr. Camelio on behalf of the Commonwealth, followed by defense counsel. In this case, you'll hear from Mr. Liam Scully in the opening statements. At the closing arguments phase of the proceedings, we reverse the order. And at that point, defense counsel will go first, followed by the Commonwealth, because, again, the Commonwealth bears the burden of proof, so we give the prosecutors the last word at the closing argument stage of the proceedings. So if everyone is ready, please take a seat. And we will first hear from the Assistant Attorney General. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I hate being alone. I hate you for all the lies. You don't love me. This is not love. Those were the words that Judy Church wrote in her notebooks that the police found while investigating the murder of Leroy Fowler. Leroy Fowler was Miss Church's boyfriend. They had been in a relationship for about 10 years. And some parts of the relationship were pretty good. They lived together at her house in Salisbury. They had purchased a home in Florida. They had some dogs that the defendant and the victim both really loved. Is it a notebook?
Yeah. Oh, you've got the notebooks now. I usually have them distributed after the openings, but that's fine. If you choose to take, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Camelio. I didn't know they were going to have notebooks. If you choose to take notes, just bear in mind that your notes don't reflect evidence. Mr. Camelio, please continue.
As I said, some parts of that relationship looked pretty good. But that relationship was not a good relationship. It was a toxic, horrible, horrible relationship. The primary reason why that relationship was so bad was that Mr. Fowler had another girlfriend. Everybody knew that he had two girlfriends. Everybody accepted it, but I think it's fair to say neither of those two women were happy about it. Miss Church was not happy about it at all. You'll get the chance to read many of the entries that she put in her notebook describing the way she thought about this relationship. And this one that I just read to you, I hate being alone, I hate you for all the lies, is just a representation of these many, many diary entries and notebook entries that she put in both her written notebooks and in the notes section of her iPhone. She cataloged the things that he did to her that made her feel unvalued, unloved, unwanted. And it's easy to understand, in part, where Miss Church was coming from. Nobody wants to feel like they are not a primary person in their loved one's life. Nobody wants to know that when things get bad in your relationship, your partner leaves and goes to his other girlfriend. But that's what was going on, and that's what has been going on for years in this particular relationship. And that's what brought us here today. That's what caused the death of Mr. Fowler. On November 11th, 2022, it's actually Mr. Fowler's birthday. And that morning, the defendant, Ms. Church, called the police because Mr. Fowler was sick. He was in bad shape. He was stumbling around the apartment. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't get his feet. He really couldn't talk or form any words. Every time he tried to pull himself up and get off the ground, he would fall back down. So after this went on for a couple of hours, Ms. Church called. Police called the ambulance, and they came, and they see the same things. They see the same things that are wrong with Mr. Fowler. She calls 911, and she says, my boyfriend must have ingested something. The first sign that you're going to hear that something was just a little bit off about this whole thing. Now, how how does she know that he ingested something? He had all sorts of health problems, pacemaker, he was complaining about illnesses leading up to this. But she immediately tells the police, immediately tells the EMTs that he must have ingested something. He's mostly not able to talk while they're there. They can't get him to stand up. They're holding him up to keep him from falling to the floor. Since he's sitting on the floor, they have to hold him up. At some point, he asks about his dog. And at some point, he may have said something about some Percocets that he took. Now, he was no saint. He already said that he had another girlfriend. He used cocaine from time to time. But there's not going to be any evidence at all that Mr. Fowler wanted to harm himself, that he was in any way thinking of ending his life, that he had any thoughts of suicide. In fact, in the months leading up to his death, he was concerned about his health. He was trying to figure out what was wrong with him, and he thought maybe he had some sort of prostate cancer. So the EMTs are there. They're looking at him, and they don't know what's wrong with him. He can't talk to them. He can't tell them what's going on. He can't stand up. He's got no control over his limbs. He's combative. And they just don't know. They don't know what's wrong with him. So off he goes to Anna Jake's hospital, and they start running tests. They start taking blood. And honestly, at the beginning, they don't know what's wrong with him either. As it goes on, they start to think, he's been poisoned with antifreeze. He has antifreeze in his system. And that's the colloquial way that people talk about ethylene glycol poisoning. Ethylene glycol is a chemical that goes into antifreeze, and it is poisonous to people. Its metabolites, when your body breaks it down, causes your liver to stop, your kidneys to stop working, and then eventually can shut down your brain. You'll hear that those symptoms that I talked about at the beginning, the falling down, the unable to talk, the stomach pains, the groaning, you'll hear that those are all the first symptoms of ethylene glycol, antifreeze poisoning. Now, after he goes to Anna Jake's, they send him off to Mount Auburn in Cambridge, another hospital where they can provide a higher level, hopefully, of care. And you're going to hear from the doctor, one of the doctors who treated him at Mount Auburn, that all of the signs that she could see, all the signs that you're going to hear about, the medical terms, it's called an anion gap, an osmolar gap, some crystals that are forming in his urine. These are all signs of antifreeze poisoning, of ethylene glycol poisoning. On the 13th, November 13th, so this happened on the 11th, the 911 call, goes to the hospital. On the 13th, Mr. Fowler dies. His brain just stops working as a result of these poisons that are coursing through his body. The police start their investigation. And you'll see that very quickly they focused on Miss Church as their suspect. They started talking to her. They realized that she had told different people different stories about what was going on with Mr. Fowler, in the 24 hours leading up to his death. They had been planning on going to Florida, found that house again. Mr. Fowler was fine on that Thursday, the day before, November 10th. Didn't show any signs of ethylene glycol poisoning. And they start talking to family, they start talking to friends, they start looking at her notebooks, they get into her phone. And they find out that, in fact, Miss Church has threatened in the past to poison Mr. Fowler. In fact, the day that he goes to the hospital, the day that he goes to Mount Auburn, Miss Church told Mr. Fowler's sister, "Oh yeah, that's one of our jokes. I joke about poisoning him. I joke about poisoning his milkshakes." And that's important because the way that you poison somebody with antifreeze, with ethylene glycol, you put it in something sweet. Antifreeze is a sweet-tasting substance that can be hidden in sweet drinks. They keep looking. They find more. They find these stories, these diary entries, these notebook entries, where she talks about how bad their relationship is. She talks about how much she hates the other woman, a woman named Barbara Randall. And she refers to her repeatedly, both in her conversations with the police and in her notes, in her notebooks, as a cunt. And I apologize for that word. It's so ugly, but it just shows you exactly what she was thinking about Ms. Randall, about the nature of their relationship. And you're going to have to read these and you're going to hear them. Some of them are vile. They really are, the way she talks about Ms. Randall. The police keep investigating, right? They go to her house on November 14th, the day after Mr. Fowler died, and they search that house. And among the items that they find is a Powerade bottle. Now, this is not the Powerade bottle that they found. This is just a representative of it, so I can show it to you. But Mr. Fowler loved his Powerade. He loved his sweet drinks. He loved his milkshakes. Loved his Diet Pepsi. He really had a horrible diet that appears to have consisted almost entirely of sugar. But they found a number of Powerade bottles. But one that they found, it just didn't look right. There was a little tiny bit at the bottom, right? A little bit of tiny liquid left, and it just wasn't quite the right color. So they take it, and it goes to the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab for some further testing. And they test it. They test it for fingerprints. They don't find any fingerprints. They test it for DNA. And what they find on the outside of the bottle is that they find Mr. Fowler's DNA, which you would expect if he drank from it. They found Miss Church's DNA on the outside of the bottle, which you might expect because it's her house, and maybe she bought it, maybe she put it in the fridge, maybe she threw it in the trash. But they also tested the mouth of the bottle. And on the mouth of the bottle, where you could only get your DNA by touching the mouth and taking off that cap, they find Mr. Fowler's DNA. They also find Miss Church's DNA on the mouth of the bottle. And why am I talking about a Powerade bottle? Because they then tested the liquid. They tested the liquid that was found inside, that little bit that was left over, and it had antifreeze in it. It had ethylene glycol. So that's going to be the murder weapon. That's the gun. That's the knife. That's the method used to kill Mr. Fowler. All the evidence that you're going to hear in this case about how Mr. Fowler died is going to be what I'm going to call circumstantial evidence. No one is going to stand up and say, I saw Miss Church put that ethylene glycol, I saw her put that antifreeze in the Powerade. That's not going to happen. No one's going to see, it's not a shooting or a stabbing where somebody can see what happens. It's all circumstantial evidence. It's all evidence that you're going to have to interpret and see what it means. And there's benefits to that, right? Sometimes it's great if you have somebody come in and say, yeah, I saw somebody shoot somebody, but you have to decide whether that witness is believable, right? But when it's circumstantial evidence, when it's the science, when it's the medical examiner coming in and saying, Mr. Fowler had ethylene glycol in his blood, when it's the chemist coming in and saying, Miss Church's DNA was on the mouth of the bottle, those are things that you need to discern, that's the evidence, right? That's what you need to interpret, not what you need to decide is true or false. Mr. Fowler had ethylene glycol in his blood when he died. He had ethylene glycol in his blood that morning when the 911 call was made. Miss Church was the only person who had access to him during the time frame that ethylene glycol would take effect on the body, about an hour to 12 hours after consumption. She was the only one who said, I'm poisoning him through his milkshakes, through his sweet drinks. She told another friend of the family at a bar that summer before his death, if he ever cheats on me, I'll poison him. The final thing that I want to talk to you about, and I left it for last because I sort of referenced it, but I told you that we know how Mr. Fowler was acting before that 911 call was made, that he was stumbling around the apartment, that he couldn't get his feet, couldn't talk. He looks like he's in a lot of pain. Now that's important, one, because of the extreme atrocity and cruelty theory that the judge has talked to you about already. But it's most important because we know that evidence because as Mr. Fowler lay on the floor, moaning, trying to get up, whacking his head, bleeding in Miss Church's bedroom, she sat on the bed and she videotaped it with her iPhone. She videotaped him for a half an hour as he lay on the floor of her bedroom, dying from antifreeze poisoning. She doesn't get up. She doesn't do anything to help him. She waits until he manages to choke out at the end, call 911, call an ambulance. She actually says that, and he goes, yes, yes. It's the only words he gets out on that entire 30 minutes of video. She shows him his unopened birthday. She shows the camera his unopened birthday presents, complains that he's tearing the room apart, and she's telling him, tell me what you took. Knowing full well that antifreeze that she gave him was coursing through his body, killing him as he lay there. You're going to hear from a number of witnesses during the course of this case. Some of them civilians who were friends with these two, some of them family, and some of them the scientists and police officers who investigated this case. At the end, I'm going to remind you about all the things that we've talked about here in the course of the openings. And I'm going to ask you to find Ms. Church guilty of murder in the first degree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camelio. And now you will hear from Mr. Scully on behalf of the defendant, Judy Church.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning. It's nice to see you all together here after 2 long days of meeting you all individually. All of us, including the defense team and Ms. Church, owe you a great deal of gratitude. So thank you for agreeing to be the jurors on her trial. This trial has been a long time coming. This is her date in court. You are her jurors. And as the clerk, when she swore you in, eloquently said, you are her country. Now, you've all set aside your lives and all the important things that you're doing to come here every day on our schedule, to sit patiently, to listen, to keep an open mind, to evaluate evidence, to deliberate when the time comes, and to reach a verdict. And no matter what that verdict is, we all owe you the same debt of gratitude. But I suggest the verdict will be not guilty. Now, the evidence that's going to come in over the next 2.5 weeks is a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. It's not all on a timeline. Witnesses come in and testify, documents get introduced, photographs get introduced, videos get played, audios get heard. And each piece of evidence represents, or is similar to, a piece of the puzzle that the prosecution is trying to put together. And you, at the end of the day, are going to decide, do the pieces fit the way they say, or not? Are there pieces they try to jam in that don't fit? And are there pieces that do fit, but are the wrong color, or otherwise don't make sense? And that's why it's essential to keep an open mind throughout the whole process until you get a good look at the entire puzzle that is this case. Now, Judy Church, way over here, You've all had barely a chance to look at her. She comes before you now, 67 years old. She was then, in 2022, 64 years old. You will learn that she's originally from Bedford, Massachusetts, that she's one of 4 sisters, that her father, Donald, was a Navy man and a firefighter, that her mother, Jean, was a mom and a bookkeeper for the Blue Ribbon Dairy. You will learn that Judy went to high school and graduated, worked as a waitress, and put herself through college. And that she eventually went to, got a degree, a bachelor's degree in education from Framingham State College. In 1988, she got a job as a school teacher at the Howe Manning Elementary School. In 1988, as a 3rd grade teacher. She taught in the 3rd grade for 1 year, and then she taught in the 4th grade for 30 years in a row. Same classroom, same school. And then she retired. Along the way, she got married. Her first husband, her only husband, Rusty. They had a son, Douglas. And in 2002, they moved to Salisbury, where this drama that is this trial starts to unfold, but not back then. They buy a house, and they move to Salisbury so Douglas could attend the Votech school. And they live together as a family, and they grow up, and they continue on. In 2012, Judy is 54 years old. Leroy Fowler comes onto the scene. He's 45 years old. He's a loose friend of the family. Rusty likes to ride motorcycles. Leroy likes to ride motorcycles. Judy likes to ride on the back of motorcycles. And they get to know each other through that circumstance. Leroy is in a relationship at that time with a woman named Julie Hawkins, mother of Michael Hawkins, who's a witness in this case. And Julie Hawkins is also described as like a second mother to Leroy Jr. So Leroy has this family, Julie Hawkins, Leroy his son, and Michael Hawkins, his stepson. But he leaves that family, and he looks for a place to live, Leroy. And he becomes a tenant at the home of Judy Church and Rusty. And this is where the relationship between Judy Church and Leroy Fowler starts to happen, comes to fruition. They start out as friends. They're in the same place. He's a lot younger, as you've heard. And he rides a motorcycle. And at that time, he's a construction worker. And he's a vibrant guy. And he represents some youth to Judy. They start hanging around. Too much, maybe. And then they fall in love. And a romance blossoms. Judy's still living in the house with her husband. And Leroy is in the house with them in a different unit. Husband Rusty finds out, and Judy and Leroy leave the house. Judy leaves her marriage. She's in love with Leroy Fowler. And she's going to give up her old life in search of something a little younger, a little newer, a little more exciting, something that's enticing. Now, this starts what I would suggest is a honeymoon phase between them. And that lasts for a while. What do? They buy a house. Actually, Judy buys a house. 108 Central Ave in Salisbury. And they move in together. And it's a fixer-upper. It's where this all happens. Judy and Leroy eventually move into the top floor. Douglas, Judy's son, moves into the bottom floor. And there's a cottage with some tenants in the back. These tenants don't really have any factual connection to this case. But there they are. And Judy and Leroy build a life together, a new life, and it's exciting. And they have fun. They go on motorcycle rides. They buy a dog together named Salt, who joins the other dog already owned by Leroy. They work on this fixer-upper all the time, and it's its own entity within their lives. And things are good. And it takes a while to get that all done. It takes about 3 years. And then someone comes on the scene that dramatically changes that. And the honeymoon period comes to an end. Leroy Fowler meets a woman named Barbara Randall. Barbara Randall is younger than Judy by almost 5 years. And he begins an affair with Barbara Randall. He starts to see her on the side. Judy finds out about it, and she is heartbroken, and she is angry at Barbara and at Leroy. And she wants Leroy to stop. But he doesn't. He refuses to stop. And so what emerges, and this is now in 2017, 2018, okay? Years earlier than 2022, where Leroy Fowler dies. What emerges in 2018 is a love triangle that Leroy Fowler has stuck these two women in, and neither one of them like it, and neither one of them like each other. Judy refers to Barbara as the C word. Barbara refers to Judy as grandma. Constantly, whenever she's talking and texting with Leroy, why don't you go home with grandma if you don't want to be with me? Leroy would. And so he creates this dynamic that goes on for years with these two women. Neither one of them want it. But he imposes it on them. And over time, they accept it. And those journal entries, and that anger in the phone and in the journals, many of those were written in that era. When Judy was really mad, and she would pick up the pen or get on her phone, and to channel her anger, she would put it all into those places. Get it out of her system. I hate you, I'm mad at you, whatever it said. That's a good place to do it. But then every time Leroy came home, she took him back. Now, over time, her plan became, I'm going to be the last woman standing. I taught in the same classroom for 30 years. I'm not leaving this guy who I love. I'm not giving up on him, even though it hurts, even though I don't like it. And so she decides, I'm sticking this through. And this goes on for years. And in fact, Leroy always comes back. And he lives with Judy. That's who he lives with. And over time, that bizarre love triangle kind of normalizes. It's not good. Leroy might like it, but Judy and Barbara don't like it. But it gets accepted. Until 2022. 2022 is the exact opposite of what the prosecution has tried to lay out for you and is the backbone of their case. 2022 is really the year for Judy because Leroy is getting tired of Barbara and he's getting ready to leave her. And he's going to stay with Judy. And we know this because in 2021 in December, they get in Judy's Jeep and they drive together to Florida. They're both getting older now. Leroy's health isn't doing so good. You heard references to pacemakers. He's got other issues coming on the scene. He's not doing great. He's out of work now. He's on SSDI. He's got some food stamps. So he's not the young guy he was, the swashbuckler on the motorcycle when he first met Judy. But he's her guy. So they drive to Florida and they shop for a home. See if they can find a house to live. They're going to move and get a new start on life and leave Salisbury and leave drugs and leave alcohol, and leave other things, and leave Barbara behind, and give it a new go. Build a new house, like the first house they built. See if they get the little magic of the honeymoon period back. And Judy buys them a house. She buys them a house, which is a trailer house. She pays cash out of her savings, $111,000. And she puts it in his name. That's the guy she hates and wants to kill. She puts that house in his name, and they buy it, and they live in that house in Florida in 2022, January, February, and March. Right? And they live there, and they make a plan to come back to this Florida house that they called their Forever house. And Judy also bought Leroy a truck, a black Dodge Ram truck, new to him, used for $13,000, and put it in his name so that he could have that to help them move back and forth. The house was in both their names. Both their names, right? This was their dream. Now, they get back to Salisbury, and of course the plan is to get organized and get back down to Florida. You arrive here in New England in the spring, it leads to the summer, and they're still sort of dallying with this idea. There's this plan to go, but the plan doesn't get quite put in motion. But it's still a plan. So throughout the spring, into the summer, it's still a plan between Judy and Leroy to go. And then the plan becomes to go that weekend that Leroy dies. So, on November 5th, 2022, Leroy sends a text message to Barbara. He breaks up with her, says it's over. I'm packed, the trailer is packed, and I'm moving to Florida with Judy. That's November 5th, right? Judy has won, if it's a competition, right? Judy has her man at long last. She has the home they're going to go to, and they're going within days. It's just a matter of the final packing arrangements. Winter is coming, it's getting colder, and they're going to Florida to live. So how could her motive be to kill him then? They're stringing this motive from all kinds of stuff, little jokes taken out of context that are off color, old entries from journals, stray text messages, trying to cobble them together. But they don't fit. They don't fit. These two were going to Florida that weekend. So what happened on the early morning that Leroy died is he has a room that's sort of the man room on one end of the house. Judy's got the bedroom that's hers and his on the other end of the house, and the living space is in between. At some point in the early morning, Leroy, it's his birthday, comes down the hall to visit with Judy. They've been texting each other all night, even though they're not far away. And there's no animosity between them in those text messages. They're about sex. And he comes down the hall, and in the bedroom, he's not doing well, right? He starts to fall out of bed. He falls down. He's becoming less and less coherent. He's not looking good, and she's asking, what did you take, Leroy? What did you take? By this time, he's a cocaine addict, heavy user. He's also a Percocet abuser. And maybe other things. But she doesn't know, so she's saying, what did you do, Leroy? What did you take? And she's filming him for the purpose of educating him, for this is what you're doing to yourself, whatever it is. And on the film, she asks, can I call 911? Can I call 911? And eventually he says yes. And she does. She's the one who calls 911 and says, my boyfriend ingested something, and she gives specific directions as to how to get into the house. Now, the EMTs arrive, And they observe Leroy and try to find out what happened. Here's something that Leroy doesn't say. He doesn't say, she did something to me. Or he doesn't say, I've been poisoned. He says, I took 10 Percocets. That doesn't seem from the labs that get them later like he did take 10 Percocets. At least they didn't seem to appear in his system. But the point isn't whether he took them or not. The point is, that's his time to say, I think she did something to me. But of course he didn't do that. Because she didn't do anything to him. And he knew it. Now what happens is, there's the, what emerges is what I'll loosely term a conspiracy theory. The police talk to Michael Hawkins, son of Julie Hawkins. They talk to Leroy Fowler's son, Leroy, Julie Hawkins' second son. They talk to Tammy Carbone. They talk to Barbara Randall, right? And then out of the woodwork, 2 years later, that friend who says he had a conversation in the bar with Judy, who said, I'll poison him if he cheats on me, right? That's John Haywood. He comes forward 2 years later. He's Leroy's first cousin. These are the civilian witnesses you're going to hear from. And they all throw shade at Judy, right? They're all picking, oh, this piece of little evidence, or she said this once, or I have this text message, or I swear Leroy said this to me, even though Leroy's not around, right? And this becomes the foundation of the prosecution case. These things. From these people. And they're admittedly hurt, angry, upset, confused, looking for answers. But they get the wrong answers by pointing the finger at her. And that gets demonstrated through the science and the math of this case. Basic science and basic math. Lawyers don't go to law school because they're good at math and science, right? So the police go eventually and they search Judy Church's home and they find this bottle, which is not this exact bottle, but this is a replica of the bottle, okay? Exact bottle should come in as an exhibit, as will many photographs. And it's a red Powerade fruit punch drink. It is known to be, by family members who tell the police, this is Leroy's, one of his favorite drinks. This is one of his favorite drinks. And it's in a clear plastic bottle, and in the bottom of it is not something that doesn't look right. In the bottom of it is something that's bright orange, a bright orange liquid. Bright orange liquid. In the bottle of what's in the bottom of what's supposed to be red powder. What they're trying to suggest is that Judy Church somehow slipped in this invisible, sweet-tasting ethylene glycol from Antifreeze, and then he drank it all and didn't know it. Then came down the hallway and didn't know that he just drank something poison even when he talked to the EMTs. That's what they're trying to suggest. Well, they're trying to prove that's not a reasonable doubt. So now there's this clear plastic bottle, supposed to have red fruit punch in it, his favorite drink, and it's got orange, something orange in it. The police sees it, they test it, right? And it comes back positive for ethylene glycol. Prosecutor referred to it as antifreeze. It's a common ingredient. And left to itself, that is a sweet-tasting ingredient, ethylene glycol, by itself. But there's a Massachusetts general law that requires that when these products are sold in Massachusetts, and there's others in other states, that antifreeze and other things that use ethylene glycol have to have a bittering agent in it to alert people, right? So if there's not an accidental consumption or something like that. Doesn't mean you wouldn't be able to chug it down if you were determined, but you would be alerted to its presence. They don't test for it. Ever. Even now. But the defense does. We hire a lab and say, hey, we have a test for this bittering agent. Was it in there? And they do the testing, and they find, yes, it was. The bittering agent was in substance. So now you've got the clear plastic bottle, supposed to have red liquid in it, has bright orange liquid in it, seems to have, has ethylene glycol in it from some source, probably antifreeze, and has the bittering agent. That's the basic science. Bittering agent is called denatonium benzoate. Now, the math of it is essentially that based on the amount of ethylene glycol in Leroy Fowler's blood, and based on the concentration of it in the sample, it appears that he would have had to have drank about 3 bottles of that stuff to put himself in the state that he was in. And that's just the math of it. So these are the questions that exonerate Judy Church. Now, what happened to Leroy? What happened to Leroy, right? Well, you guys might be in the best position of all to get good insight into that. You're going to hear from all these witnesses and get a chance to evaluate all the evidence. And you might figure it out, or have good ideas about it. Or you might not. You might not figure it out, because that's not your mission. Your mission isn't to find out, well, what did happen to Leroy? Your mission is much narrower and much clearer. Have they proved beyond a reasonable doubt that she murdered him? That's your mission. Now, when Leroy died, so did all of Judy's dreams to go to Florida. So did many of her relationships, including a valuable one with Tammy Carbone, Leroy's sister-in-law, and other people. She got accused, and now she stands alone to defend herself. But Judy Church is not a murderer. She's a lot of things. She's a daughter, sister, a mom, teacher, an educator, an ex-wife, girlfriend, a bit of a fool. She's not a murderer. At the end of this trial, the defense will have another chance to address you all, and by then, the jigsaw puzzle will be finished. And it will be missing pieces, and at least one of those pieces is going to be the wrong color. Orange. Bright orange. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. Mr. Camelio, are you prepared to start with your first witness? Or I can. All right. Let's take the break at about 11, but let's get